Hello there and welcome back to the channel. Now I know it's been a very long time, over 3 months in fact, since that alternate universe video, which is in progress, I'm promising you, just that my computer is kind of dead right now, so it will take a bit more time to release it. But anyway, back to this video. So I know you've read the title. Just a few days ago on Christmas, 25th December, BattleBots released a teaser trailer for the upcoming season on their Twitter and on their Facebook, on their social media. And I think with less than 10 days to go for Discovery Channel's BattleBots Season 7 coming on the 5th of January, it is finally time to get hyped and it is finally time to get excited for the brand new season of BattleBots. Now you already saw the title of this video. What I'm going to do essentially in this video is discuss what I think are most popularly considered to be the championship contenders for Season 7 of BattleBots, go through each of them, give you my opinions, and tell them whether I think they could have a chance at bringing the giant nut in Season 7 or not. And out of the many robots that are supposed to participate this season, I will go through the most likely picks. And of course, we can't talk about championship contenders for Season 7 without talking about the current reigning champion, Tantrum. And of course, Tantrum, it has excellent durability, it's excellently driven, and it has deceptively good power in that weapon. But yet, a bit of a controversial opinion, I don't think Tantrum actually has the greatest chance of becoming a two-time world champion and bringing the giant nut in Season 7 as well. Now, don't get me wrong, Tantrum is of course easily one of the best robots in the entire field. However, I do think that Tantrum now being a known quantity, now that teams are going to take them seriously and actually prepare for them, Tantrum is going to find it extremely hard to really get 2 consecutive titles and win in Season 7 as well. Now, I do think Tantrum, more so than most other robots in this list, relies a bit too much when it comes to driving skills and agility, and we have seen that exploited in the past, especially in the fight against Endgame last season in Champions, or even in the first half of their fight against Hydra in the semi-finals of last year. When Tantrum can't get underneath you from the front and when it can't get to your sides either, it really struggles with that weapon, with really what is negative reach, I would say, to get good hits on the opponent and really deliver what could be a shot to the opponent. Tantrum doesn't have the same knockout power as many of the robots on this list, and that is going to hurt it as well. Now, Tantrum is, of course, I think still a very good robot, going to make at least quarterfinals, semi-finals again. But I do think now with robots like Endgame, with Hydra, Witch Doctor, and even Hypershock, Minotaur at the top of that game, it is going to be extremely hard for Tantrum to win another consecutive championship, winning the giant nut in Season 7 as well. Now, I do think that Tantrum did get a bit lucky last season in some of its fights, especially against Witch Doctor, against Hydra, against Rotator and Gigabyte. Now, I'm not saying they wouldn't have won those fights without luck, but I'm saying that there was an element of luck present in those fights. And while luck is important, I do think that this season, with the other robots that I will reach later on in the video at the top of their game, Tantrum is going to find it much harder to actually make a really deep run into the tournament. And while they are definitely still championship contenders, top robots in the field, I do think there are some other robots with a much greater chance than Tantrum. And one of the robots that I think does have a higher chance than Tantrum to get the giant nut in Season 7 is in fact the Season 5 champion, Endgame. Now, the reason I do think Endgame has a higher chance, or a pretty good chance in fact, Endgame is, again, one of the lowest robots in the entire field. But apart from this, ever since Season 5, they've shown that they're actually extremely durable, extremely reliable, and they are one of the hardest hitting robots in the entire field. And while of course not as maneuverable, as agile as Tantrum, they are still mobile enough that they can exploit weaknesses pretty well. And I think this was actually on perfect display in their fights, both of their fights against Witch Doctor, where in spite of Witch Doctor being clearly the faster, more maneuverable machine, Endgame was still agile enough to keep up with them, get underneath them, and get the better angles and better hits throughout the fight. And I think that is really the most potent part of Endgame. Even though they do have an extremely powerful weapon, even though they are extremely durable, I do think because their ground game is so good, they sort of employ the Hydra strategy, where they don't need the fancy driving of Whiplash or Tantrum. As long as they can keep their front pointed towards you, you are going to find it extremely hard to get around to the sides and to get good purchase on Endgame and get good hits that could potentially end the fight. That's why I think out of most of the robots in this list, Endgame actually has one of the highest chances to become the Season 7 World Champion. They just have everything going for them. They're not an all-rounder like Bite Force, but they have amazing weapon power, they're durable enough, and they have that ground game that no matter what they face, it is always going to be a good matchup for Endgame, irrespective of what weapon they are or what strategy the other robot follows during the fight. That being said, I do think Endgame, like every other robot, does have its fair shares of flaws and disadvantages, which I think were really well shown in its fight against Minotaur. Certain strategies can potentially negate Endgame's major strength, which is its ground game and its forks, which is what Minotaur did in its fight against Endgame. That being said, yes, Endgame does have disadvantages, it can be exploited, but I do think that compared to most other robots, Endgame does have a very tight-knit strategy and overall just doesn't have those many weaknesses to exploit when compared to certain other robots, which yes, we will come across in the remainder of this video. So overall, I do think that Endgame, while it isn't invulnerable by any means, just the combination of their ground game, of the power of their weapon, and just their average durability and reliability, and honestly their pretty good driving as well, is just a lethal combination. And if they can work on their few flaws from last year and build an even better endgame for this season, they will easily be one of the best robots in the field and definitely a contender to be a two-time world champion, and could definitely, in my opinion, win the world champion, win the giant nut in Season 7 as well. Now, of course, you really can't talk about championship contenders without talking about Witch Doctor. From the very beginning, except for Season 3, I think Witch Doctor has always been hailed as a championship contender. And Witch Doctor, out of all the non-championship robots, has definitely come the closest on this list to winning a BattleBots World Championship. They made the finals in Season 4, losing against Bite Force, and again in Season 6, the latest season, losing only to Tantrum in the finals yet again. That is 2 times Witch Doctor has just fallen short of the giant nut, or 3 times if you want to factor in their loss to Endgame in the finals of BattleBots Champions last year. I think Witch Doctor, just like Endgame in our previous case, has a really good combination of factors going for it, and that is why, in my opinion, it has one of the highest chances of any robot to become the world champion of Season 7. Now, I think Witch Doctor has a really powerful weapon, it has pretty powerful drivetrain as well, and to add to this, it is also an extremely durable and pretty reliable bot as well when it doesn't smoke out. And Michael lately is also a highly underrated driver and is honestly one of the best drivers in the entire sport. And I think the only reason Witch Doctor has fallen short in prior seasons is because of its reluctance to have a ground game. But I do think that in the long run, this lack of a ground game for Witch Doctor is actually good for it in the future, because unlike robots like Tantrum or Endgame, which we just saw, it doesn't have this sort of liability that if its forks get breached or damaged, its entire fight is over. And furthermore, it also means that Witch Doctor doesn't need to waste time and try to get the perfect angle on the opponent. It can just drive in and get massive bite, which other robots simply cannot do unless they get underneath their opposing robot, which is a massive advantage for Witch Doctor. And because of these reasons, I do believe that Witch Doctor could make a really strong, really deep run into Season 7's tournament. And in my opinion, again, along with Endgame, honestly has the highest chance of winning the World Championship altogether. If I had to place my money on one robot to win the giant nut for next year, it would almost indefinitely be Witch Doctor. Now, the next robot I want to talk about in this video has to be Whiplash. I think Whiplash is another robot like Witch Doctor that ever since its debut in Season 3 has always been lauded as a championship contender, but it's never been able to really reach that level. The closest they've been to getting their hands on the giant nut was probably in Season 5, losing to Endgame in the finals. Whiplash came in with a lot of new configurations this season, but I think a lot of people were caught off guard and surprised by a sort of slump in Whiplash in Season 6. Now, don't get me wrong, Whiplash did look extremely strong in Season 6 as well, but I do think compared to earlier seasons, the weaknesses that had been exploited far better by robots like Cobalt in the round of 16 or by Witch Doctor in the Bounty Hunters finals. I think the weakness we really observed in Whiplash this year is pretty simple. Whiplash simply cannot take hits very well. And yes, its only losses were to extremely destructive robots like Cobalt and Witch Doctor, but the issue being we have seen this weakness before in previous seasons. Whiplash is good at avoiding hits with their excellent driving, but they're not good at being durable and taking hits to their chassis. And that is why I honestly think that Whiplash isn't going to be a championship contender this year either. Now don't get me wrong, just like the previous robots in this list, I do think of course Whiplash is a very good robot that could make a very deep run into the tournament. But I think the sort of lack of durability is really going to let them down, especially in the later stages of the tournament, say in the round of 16 or quarterfinals. Now to an extent, it's okay if you're a spinner and you aren't too durable because you still have that massive hard hitting weapon in the front. But if you're not a spinner, if you're a lifter especially, it is going to be very hard to get far into the tournament without being very durable. And that I think is really the Achilles heel of Whiplash in this scenario. Again, I do think it's a really good robot. Matt Vasquez is easily one of the best drivers in the history of robot combat, and Whiplash is a highly versatile, highly effective robot as well. But I do think that because of this lack of durability that Whiplash has shown in the past, to ensure that they win a fight, Matt Vasquez has to be 110% on his game throughout the entire match, which is a very hard ask for a driver in a sport like Battlebots, where the smallest mistake, if you don't have a durable robot, can mean the end of your entire fight. So Whiplash, while it is, in my opinion, still easily a top 5 or 6 robot in the entire field, just will fall a bit short of the championship in Season 7 as well, at least in my opinion. Now speaking of robots that seem to just fall short every season, of course we have to talk about SawBlaze. Now SawBlaze is, I think, another robot like Whiplash who in the last few seasons has been constantly thought of and lauded as a championship contender, but just losing out again just like Whiplash. This year they lost out after looking absolutely dominant in the Fight Night format, only to Witch Doctor in the semi-finals, which fair enough, it's Witch Doctor. This was, in my opinion, easily the best version and most dominant version we have ever seen SawBlaze, at least since its debut way back in Season 2 of BattleBots. They absolutely plowed through top tier robots like Minotaur and Mad Catter in the Fight Nights and had a really deep run into the tournament, again making it all the way to the semi-finals before losing to Witch Doctor. And I think Jameson Go really proved himself as one of the top drivers in the entire sport. However, that being said, I do think that SawBlaze, like Whiplash, is going to make a really deep run next year in the tournament, but I do think that they are just going to fall short of the giant nut yet again. Now SawBlaze, I think, has a lot of similar weaknesses to Whiplash in this area, where SawBlaze is armored very strategically so that it is armored where it normally takes hits. When its front is breached and when its ground game is invalidated, SawBlaze becomes incredibly vulnerable to attacks from other spinners. And I think we have seen this too many times in SawBlaze fights, where if their forks are somehow damaged, or if robots can avoid the forks altogether and get to their flanks, SawBlaze very easily becomes a punching bag throughout the fights. Yet again, I do think that SawBlaze is still one of the top robots in the competition, and the ground game, which is one of the best ground games in the field, is perfectly used to trap bots, get underneath them, and rain damage with their extremely powerful hammer saw, and the driving of Jameson Go can perfectly exploit weaknesses as well. However, I do think with all of the disadvantages that we have just discussed from SawBlaze, I don't expect to see it in the finals next year or win the giant nut. But that being said, I do hope I'm proven wrong, because SawBlaze is one of my favorite robots in the field and I would love to see it doing well. The next robot in this video has to be my all-time favorite robot, aside from Bronco obviously, Hydra. Now Hydra is, again, just like Whiplash, just like SawBlaze, a robot that was expected to do extremely well and even win the giant nut in the last few seasons, but has shown some serious issues that I do want to discuss in this video. But before that, I do want to say that Hydra, I think, is undisputedly the king of ground game in BattleBots and has been so for the last couple of years. Apart from this, I do also think that Jake Ewart is an extremely good driver and underrated in my regard. While he may not be as exploitive in his driving style or aggressive as someone like Matt Vasquez or Zach Lytle, he is by far the best defensive driver in the sport. But even when he needs to be aggressive against robots like Witch Doctor or horizontal spinners like Gigabyte and Ribot, he can indeed be a very good aggressive driver too. He's shown the ability to perfectly place Hydra in fights, and even against super well-driven robots like Tantrum and Whiplash, he can still keep up with them and in fact get the better of them in many of their exchanges. And to add to this, in spite of many people talking down Hydra's armor and saying, oh, it's really bad armor, I do think that Hydra is actually one of the better armored, one of the more durable robots in the field. They've consistently been able to take massive monster shots from really big hitters, robots like Witch Doctor, robots like Hypershock, Endgame, Uppercut, and Glitch. And for the most part, in spite of taking these massive hits, Hydra is able to brush them off and continue the fight like nothing happened. Hydra's flipper is also really powerful and can actually do some level of damage to the robots that they fight. And even if they can't, it is still an absolute spectacle to watch Hydra fights. Now when it comes to glaring weaknesses from Hydra, I think there really are only two. First of all, what we saw last season was Hydra having a lot of reliability issues in its fights against Endgame, Glitch, and even Tantrum, where even though Hydra had the upper hand in those fights at the beginning, when the fight went on, they started to smoke out, and the flipper got stuck on many occasions. In fights like against Glitch, their drive is what suffered, and this is what led to many of these fights go the other way, even though at the beginning of those fights, it was very clearly in Hydra's favor. The second major issue I want to talk about is about how Hydra, because it's so low to the ground, it keeps getting stuck on the inner floor. And the issue with this is, even when Hydra wants to be aggressive and maneuverable, it gets stuck up on the floor so many times it can't be. Not only does this impact the judging and aggression, but it also means Hydra can't maneuver as well in fights. This was actually shown really well in their season fight last year against Whiplash, where even though they got Whiplash on their head so many times, whenever they moved forward to get a follow-up flip, they kept getting stuck on the floor and couldn't do so. Now after this analysis, weighing out all the pros and cons of Hydra, I do still think that next season they will be championship contenders, and while they may not necessarily get their hands on the giant nut, I do think they will be up there with robots like Endgame and Witch Doctor, but I think they do genuinely have a good chance at becoming Season 7 World Champions of BattleBots. Now before moving on to the last robot in this video, I do want to give sort of an honorable mention to robots like Hypershock, Blip, Lockjaw, Black Dragon, Rotator, Riptide, Scorpios, and Ribot. Robots that I think are really good and could make it really far in the tournament in Season 7, but just aren't on the level of the other robots in this video. The final robot that I want to talk about here in this video has to be the Brazilian bull, Minotaur. Now Minotaur is a robot that, like Whiplash and Witch Doctor, has been really close to winning it all a couple of times, most particularly in Season 3 losing only to Bite Force in the finals. Especially after their very controversial loss to Witch Doctor last year, they will be in a much upgraded form and definitely will be looking out for the championship this year. After Minotaur's return to BattleBots last year after quite a bit of time outside the sport because of COVID-19, a lot of people were a bit doubtful about how viable Minotaur's design would still be, but I think Minotaur definitely did prove that the design is absolutely still as dangerous and deadly as it ever was. They had a great season last year, losing only to SawBlaze and controversy to Witch Doctor throughout the season, and the cherry on top for their seeing being of course their amazing fight against Endgame, one of the best of the entire season. Minotaur has always been known for being able to dish out massive hits, but also being an absolute tank and taking in some of the biggest hits we've ever seen in the BattleBots. Paired with their pretty good reliability and track record over the seasons, I do think Minotaur has always been a robot that could definitely fight for championships, and I do think that this year they will be a pretty strong championship contender as well, more so than the likes of say Whiplash or SawBlaze that we discussed earlier. Now I do think that while Minotaur is of course an extremely good robot, it does have its flaws. It has a bit suspect reliability at times, and its ground game, while it is pretty good when they want it to be good, when they go without their 4 configurations, it can get them in a bit of sticky situations like it did against say SawBlaze at the beginning of last year. And while they can get good bites on their opponents, for the most part, because of their drum design, they get sort of these grind attacks which don't have the same knockout power as, again, robots like Endgame, Witch Doctor, or even Hydra. So I do think it does have its flaws. But overall, balancing its pros and cons, do I think Minotaur is a legitimate championship contender for next year? Yes, I do think it is. Now that circles back to the very beginning of the video. Who do I think will win Season 7 of BattleBots? Throughout this video, I think the robots in the best place, the best contention to win the championship would probably be Endgame, Witch Doctor, Hydra, and Minotaur, among the many that we have discussed, and the many competing next year in BattleBots. Out of these, I would probably rank them something like Endgame and Witch Doctor having the highest chance, and then Hydra, and then Minotaur. Although it would of course be very interesting to be proven wrong at the end of the season. Now, at the time of recording this segment of the video, BattleBots will release in just about 3 days on the 5th of January or the 6th depending on where you live in the world, and it is going to be an absolutely amazing season. I am absolutely excited for what will come up next. Probably the season I have been the most hyped up for in the history of BattleBots. And that is where I think I'm going to go ahead and end this video. Now thank you so much for watching all the way till the end, even though this video was way longer than I expected it to be. Of course, go ahead, subscribe, leave a like, and go down, comment your predictions for who you think will win the season in the comment section below. I will see you next time in my next video, which hopefully is less than 3 months from now.